Right at the start of this whole series, we learned that Satan is called the ruler with authority in the region of the air, and that he works from that position in those who are disobedient to God. He rules over rebels. Several times the book of John describes him as the ruler of this world. 2 Corinthians 4:4 even calls him the God of this world, with a small g of course. What this series has hopefully done is show the reality of those verses and illustrated that Satan is still very much at work in this world, as he has been from the beginning of time, using the same tricks over and over to deceive people into rebelling against God and turning worship towards himself. He has been the king of Tyre, or the spiritual force behind many human princes of Tyre, or antichrists, throughout history, from Nimrod to Ignatius Loyola to Adolf Hitler, and so on, and he is soon to raise up an end-time antichrist that will initiate a tribulation like the world has never seen before. But there's something important we need to understand before we end, and that is God's sovereignty over this situation. Despite everything we've heard about, understand that there is nothing that is beyond his control. God is far above every demon, antichrist, principality and power, and far above Satan himself. I think it's important to make this point because as we went through this series, it may have appeared that Satan was winning, that he was running rampant throughout history, raising up antichrists at will to manipulate, intimidate and destroy true believers. We can't help but see the encroaching darkness in our time as well, and it would be easy to think that there was little hope. But I want to show you how this works if I can. Go back to the oldest book of the Bible, the book of Job, and we find Satan in front of God's throne asking for his permission to test Job. God allows it, but he sets the boundaries saying, "You may test him, do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically." Later on, Satan comes back again and asks for the boundaries to be loosened a little, and again God agrees, but again he defines the limits. Now what this basically tells us is that Satan is on a leash, and he can only do what God allows. And as 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. He gives us strength to endure it. This begs the question though, why does God allow Satan to attack us at all? Well, very simply, God allows us to suffer because when accepted with the right attitude, it refines us and purifies us. Suffering produces in us Christ-like character and prepares us for the freedom of the eternal kingdom to come. It's one of the most unfortunate things about human beings that when things are going well for us, we tend to forget about God and become comfortable, soft, self-sufficient, apathetic, and we don't actually do much growing. Suffering, on the other hand, sharpens our focus, our resolve, and turns our hearts and minds towards God. We lose our sense of self-sufficiency and are forced to accept our dependence on our Creator. It's in suffering that we actually develop our relationship with God the most. In the same way that turbulent water turns rocks into smooth pebbles, trials refines us. The truth is that we need trials to develop character. Romans 5:3-5 says, "We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance, and endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation, and this hope will not lead to disappointment." Zechariah 13:9 says that trials purifies or refines us in the same way that fire purifies and refines gold or silver. We need to go through the fire to be refined. 2 Corinthians 4:17 says, "For our present troubles are small and won't last very long, yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever." So our suffering produces an eternal glory. I don't want to treat suffering lightly, but we need to see it through eternal eyes and recognize that this temporary life is only preparing us for eternity. We don't belong here, and we're not meant to invest all our hopes in this life. We are passing through a temporary, dying kingdom en route to an everlasting one, and the troubles we experience here are merely producing in us the kind of Christ-like character that we will need to become citizens of that future kingdom. Acts 14:22 says, "We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God." We are effectively in the wilderness on the way to the promised land right now. In the light of eternity, all present suffering in this wilderness will seem fleeting, like the blink of an eye, and it will have achieved a glorious end. Think of the greatest characters in the Bible and you'll notice this recurring theme. Before they reach their destiny, they often have to endure a wilderness first. Joseph, Moses, David, and even Jesus himself had to go out to the wilderness to be tested for 40 days and 40 nights. But the clearest example of this point comes in Exodus. When the Israelites left Egypt for the promised land, they had to endure a wilderness first. The wilderness was a proving ground for the Israelites, and they stayed there until they were ready for the promised land. God provided for them in that wilderness, but it was a wilderness nonetheless. Likewise, there is a promised land ahead for us Christians, and in the meantime, God will provide for us in this wilderness, but it is a wilderness nonetheless. Don't get too comfortable here. Like the Israelites, this isn't the destination, we're just passing through. Ephesians 2:10 tells us that we each have a job to do here that was planned for us long before we were even born. We've effectively been dropped in behind enemy lines in this world to carry out that mission. Some people need money for their mission, others don't. Some need health, others don't. But all of that is of secondary importance to the eternal goal. We've set our sights too low if we invest everything in the here and now. C.S. Lewis wrote, "We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. We should be like soldiers abroad, focused on the task at hand but dreaming of the day the war is won and we get to go home." Now many Israelites lost heart in the wilderness and turned aside to the satanic mystery religion. That generation were therefore never permitted to enter the promised land. Similarly, in these last days we'll see people losing heart as well and turning to the mystery religion, and they won't see the promised land either. But others will stay the course and will one day see glory. Let us be one of them. Let our present troubles shape and mold and purify and help us develop a relationship with God and a dependency on God so that we will be ready for the promised land. And of course, let's do all we can to take as many people as we can with us. Our focus here can be summed up in the phrase, to know God and make Him known. Finally, as we see things getting darker all around us, we shouldn't be worried or afraid of the days to come. Instead, we should be incredibly excited that everything is happening exactly as God said it would, and that He is completely sovereign over the events that are about to take place. Jesus told us ahead of time in Matthew 24:25 what was going to happen so we wouldn't be caught off guard, and in Luke 21:28 He said that when we begin to see everything that was prophesied beginning to take place, that we should take heart, stand up and look up, for our salvation is near. Indeed, just as things seem darkest, we are actually closest to the dawn. Nothing illustrates this better than Jesus' own death and resurrection. While God in human flesh was being mocked, tortured, and nailed to a cross of wood, taking the punishment that we deserved upon Himself to give us life, outwardly it seemed that Satan was winning in that moment, that darkness would triumph. The disciples were scattering, lost, confused and afraid. It was the darkest hour. But actually this greatest evil in world history, the death of Christ, was just a precursor to the greatest good. Jesus' death bought freedom and everlasting life for anyone who would repent of their sin and trust in Him for salvation. He provided a way to God where there had been no way, and He orchestrated it all Himself. Judas Iscariot acted under the inspiration of Satan to betray Jesus, but Jesus Himself initiated the process, telling Judas to go ahead and do what he had planned to do. When the officers came to take Jesus away, He said, "I was with you day after day in the temple. You did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." In other words, this hour has been given to you. You are taking me no sooner and no later than what my Father planned. In John 10:18, Jesus makes it clear that Satan isn't taking His life, saying, "No one can take my life from me. I sacrifice it voluntarily, for I have the authority to lay it down when I want to and also to take it up again, for this is what my Father has commanded." In other words, God remains sovereign even in what appeared to be Satan's crowning moment, and He's sovereign in our dark times too. In Daniel 2:21 we read that God controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. Daniel 4:17 says, "The Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world. He gives them to anyone He chooses." So in other words, all rulers, even evil ones, are allowed to rule only because God allows it for his own purposes. God sets the boundaries, and they are all completely at God's mercy. So let everyone who has watched this series know one thing about the days to come. God wins. Jesus reigns triumphant. Every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Satan will be thrown into the lake of fire along with his hordes of demons, and we will reign with Jesus in glory forever and ever. Satan's time is very short and getting shorter, and he knows it. So stand firm and keep your faith. Endure the trials. Let them mold your character and prepare you for glory. If you haven't given your life to God yet, do it now before it's too late. And Christians, carry out the task that God has for you here. Finish your race. Don't back out of the war and bow to manipulation or intimidation, and in the end you will receive everlasting life.